Heyo, Liege Games, let's do this. Now, a little bit different format, but what are my top games? Not just my top games from April, the top games that I was actually able to play. I'm not going to run you through all 25 of the different games that I played in the month of April. Fantastic from that standpoint. However, some were stand out more than others. Let's talk about which ones they were and why in the more condensed version, mini review, as well as my thoughts, pros, cons, and everything in between. Some you have seen me mention on the channel, some you haven't. But let's talk. Let's do this. And as always, smash the like button because you know you're going to like it, and Patreon below, subscribe if you haven't, and let's just get right into it because we got some good games to talk about. Let's go. So I'm actually going to cheat. I'm going to cheat. I lied. So first up, we're actually going to do two honorable mentions. Honorable mention number one is Tokyo Sidekick. Now, this is an import, a port over from Japan by Japanime Games. Recently delivered Kickstarter, probably a month and a half ago or so. And it is a spin on the generic pandemic formula where you are superheroes that each have, not just special abilities, but also sidekicks that you are going to be both managing on a board. Now, it's 2 to 4 player. I think you actually probably get away with 1, but it's an interesting dynamic because you're unlocking these skills that your characters have in terms of putting out the fires, and you have sort of a little bit of a deck building mechanic there as well. And you can see sort of, it's standees, right? And a big map, like a big true, I think it's actually a true map of Japan. And you're going between these cities, stomping out the villains until you get, enough villains defeated until the big bad comes out. Now, interesting game. I'm not sure how I feel. I'm not going to make final judgment yet because I only played it through once. But the difficulty between, they've got like the villains, the super villains, and then like the mega kaiju bosses, essentially. And the difficulty ramp up at the end is insane. And I'm not sure if there's a good way to win it in that sense, or if the difficulty just ramps up so much that it almost becomes too difficult, where it becomes less fun. Like, not difficult a challenge, but difficult in terms of optimization. Now, here you go. Essentially, what you're doing is you're drawing cards each turn, and you lay them out here, and these are the abilities that you have to use, and you are going, either they're allowing you to travel, or they're allowing you to do certain actions along this line of your player board that you can see here, and you'll have not only the regular ones, but then ones you can buy that give you extra, and then you have the damage cards that you just get based on having bad guys out on the board at the end of the round, because it's sort of a 3-round dynamic, right? You go, and then the bad guy goes. And then down here you can see the sidekick with the gadget and the hero themselves with the upgradable, unlockable extra abilities there. And then again, your asymmetric ability there, and the special abilities that you're unlocking. Now, again, getting bonuses, and this is probably the cleverest thing of this game, is getting extra bonuses that you can unlock, again, via experience based on the things you do to get more power in your attacks against the bad guys if you have multiple people in a location, and especially if they're your two as opposed to you and just anyone else. Again, you can see here in the picture, I've got it blown up, and this has the acrylic standees too, if you really wanted those. You're putting down these missions, and you're having to basically put out the fires, but then the bad guys are popping up as well, and then you jail them up here, and once you have enough up there, then the big bad guy arrives. So, again, not quite sure. Here's the mechanic of the turn. So, when it gets back to here, if there's anything red down here, or I believe maybe just out here, red or yellow, that's part of how the damage you get, including the monsters. These are essentially the fires, the different level of fires, green, yellow, and red that you have to put out in order of, difficulty, obviously. So that's honorable mention number 1. Honorable mention number 2 is Three Sisters, Pinchback and Riddles, heavy roll and write. And I give this one not a final judgment as well, which is why it's also an honorable mention, because I haven't been able to do anything but solo. This is probably the heaviest in terms of interactions, gameplay, and combinations of things you're trying to manage all at once of a roll and write that I've ever played. I would dare say it's probably one of the heaviest ones out there. Obviously, not having all of the roll and writes, there will be another roll and write on this list, but this one was a lot heavier than I was expecting, especially having been able to play Motor City their most recent Kickstarter that just funded like a month or two ago. So I was actually expecting this one to be that heavy, and I think this one is heavier now having played both of them. Again, beautiful aesthetic, great theme, works well. I just not sure if it's too heavy for me. I got to try it out a few more times to, have a really good sense of things. Now, let's get on to the list. Number 10. Number 10 is Dark Quarter. I mean, I put my review out. The Kickstarter just finished funding. It is Chronicles of Crime and Destinies just combined in a cooperative dark noir New Orleans theme with a vampire, ex-detective whose wife was mysteriously murdered, a drunken former detective, and a magical mystical witch whose mom all of a sudden disappeared, and they all run a PI agency, and there's bad guys killing stuff with magic, and you have to figure out what it is crime-wise through several different scenarios. Again, too dark for me. I don't think I'd be able to play it with anyone, and so I just don't, again, the gameplay was solid. I don't think it's going to be, it's better gameplay-wise than either of those other games that I already mentioned, so I don't think there's any doubt from that aspect. It's just whether or not it's for you. So there you go as number 10. Number 9, Encyclopedia. I just put the review out for that as well. Encyclopedia, pleasant surprise, nice worker placement from a dice perspective, but not too heavy either. Enough interaction, the art is good. It felt just a little bit random at times, though, in terms of some of these animals that were coming out and the symbols that's on the bottom, because too many times when these come out, you'll have, another purple Asia animal here, for this example, and you just won't have any symbols match up, or you'll have one symbol and it's clearly not the symbol you need. And again, how much of that dynamic, because this deck is freaking massive of the size of animals, which is good and bad because you just don't have control of it then. But it's going to lead who can make the best lemonade out of lemons. And sometimes you just can't make good lemonade because you have a crappy, scrawny lemon that's been sitting in the refrigerator for 2 weeks and it's starting to shrivel up and it's just not going to be any good no matter how much sugar you put in it. And that's essentially what you run into with some of these. Now, the dynamics in terms of the board spaces and what you're doing in each area, I really like that. But it definitely felt like to me that the benefit of getting some of the bonuses down here of taking these cubes, I'll see if I can pull up over here, these cubes right here of the matching animals, of the symbols, was definitely not nearly as powerful in terms of end stage victory points as the set collections that you're winning right here. And so that felt a little bit overpowered, and just the ability to sometimes get the one you need in here. But I thought this was probably the most clever mechanic in here in the middle when you're researching, where if you're the first one there, you're going to get a bonus. But if you're the last one there, you're also going to get a bonus in a different way. That was really cool. And so from a worker placement side of things, it was definitely the right weight for me. Speaking of weights again, and I'm more encouraged by this. That's why Wayfarers of the South Tigris was really appealing to me, but I'm ultimately probably going to end up passing on Wayfarers just because promos, I have made my peace with not having promos and maybe getting the full thing for a cheaper price later. So that's number 9, and that's the Encyclopedia game. Number 8, here's your roll and write that I mentioned earlier. Welcome to the Moon. I got this paid forward to me. And again, I haven't been able to play through much of it. I just played solo, but it has an aesthetic and an appeal in terms of the ease to get to the table, which is a huge, huge thing. And my wife has more of an inclination towards these games, in part because I think she just likes this type of game, but in part also because they're not big rules-wise for her to understand. And again, she doesn't like having things, sit down and explain 10 minutes before we start to play. So it was a perfect combination. Now, it is a roll and write campaign game, and you can play it solo off. And so I just haven't gone through the whole campaign. So I don't know how I'm going to feel. Am I going to be happy with having it at the end, having played through all of it? Is it going to stand the test of time? I don't know. Not many of my roll and writes I have really felt super, super good about. I guess the one I'm looking forward to the most getting back to the table is something along the lines of Let's Make a Bus Route, the dice version, because as much as I like the original Let's Make a Bus Route, it's just not as replayable. It seems very much the same in slightly different ways because the copy I have also only has one board. Now, Get On Board is the wooden version being imported over to North America soon, and that one has much more appeal, and so I might end up swapping it out. But same thing with Cartographers. The base game of Cartographers did not have enough for me. Now Cartographer Heroes is definitely better, but I think you need some of the add-ons. But when you're talking a roll and write, I also don't want to spend $50 or $60 for a roll and write, because again, it sort of defeats the purpose, although at the same time it makes sense to pay more for a game that you get played more, right? That's the ideal. So I guess it's a bit of a dichotomy. It's a game that I don't wish or ever think should cost that much, but at the same time, if I'm playing it that much, maybe it's worth more of an investment. So again, gonna see where this goes. Not sure where this is gonna be in 6 months. Could see it easily being a keep forever in terms of one of the better roll and writes. I could easily see it leaving if it just doesn't have enough staying power, sort of like the others that I mentioned. 7, Moonrakers. And again, this one is subject to change. I have one of the expansion modules for Moonrakers right here that is going to be coming out in Kickstarter later this year. And so this might ratchet this up, but this is also because, again, limited plays. Limited plays with this. I will say I played it solo first. This has probably one of the best solo modes I have seen in a while because, again, I'm not a solo aficionado. If you want solo aficionados, go to other channels. At the same time, I'd like to illustrate it as an innovative space deck builder. It does things in just slightly enough a different way to make it stand out from other deck builders to make me go, interesting. I'm not sure where I'm really going to fall in this. And there's not a lot that really makes me do that. You know, having played, a couple hundred games now, you sort of get a sense of where things are at after a play or two. For the most part, not like final, but like, okay, I can start tiering stuff. I can start sort of generalizing where I think this is going to end up in the things I like or don't like. And it made me go, I don't really know how I feel yet about this one. How high is this one going to go? And I don't know. The solo mode, though, going back to that for a second, the solo mode is incredibly well done. Having played other games solo that I've done since I started this channel to be able to talk about them, or even two-handed to be able to talk about them as well. And this one definitely stands head and shoulders above a lot of the other games, almost all of the other games I have done in that regard. And so if you are a lower player count, because we always think of deck builders as, I need 2, 3, 4, especially those latter two, to really get the full effect. This one does a great job on the solo aspect, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Now, it's got an interesting dynamic between buying the ship parts, recruiting your allies, and building your deck itself, because not only are you building your deck, but you're having to manage the amount of actions that you have, because unlike a lot of other deck builders where it's literally just lay all your cards down and play whatever you want, this has a different feel of you only have so many actions, and you may actually have to alliance making with several other players and potentially negotiate the rewards of the quests that you are going on or trying to finish in the first place, because majority of the time you won't be able to finish them by yourself. Here is an example of said quests, and it tells you exactly how many cards, not that you have to have in your hand, but that you actually have to be able to play with actions in order to do it. It gives you the difficulty or the noise that you're essentially going to have to make in terms of rolling the dice and making sure you have enough shields to be able to block this damage. Otherwise, you're going to, take a penalty. And so again, the dynamic there is definitely there. I know why people like this. I know why it's so highly thought of, and it's an IV Games game. And so the production is top notch. So I can only see this one going up with repeated plays. It's just a question of how high. And it is, again, contrary to, what we just talked about there with Welcome to Moon, it's a little bit more of an overhead. The dynamic difference will make sense, but it's also in terms of the interactions and the negotiations. Some people may not like negotiation in terms of sharing, which is why I would argue that even if you don't like the negotiation sharing, it still works very, very well as a solo game, and you can get away with playing it there very easily as well. And that's why it's number 7. Number 6, this one is a strange entry. You guys probably have never heard of this one, or most of you have not at least. This is the Duke. I picked this up in a trade a long time ago, probably 2-3 years ago at least. And think abstract, and if chess had tiles instead of pieces, right? These are examples of the pieces of Duke. And why this is the way it is because each of these tiles, what you're not seeing here is two-sided. You can see that the centerpiece is where this piece is located on the board, and then the other symbols around it identify its abilities or its actions that you can take. So for example, the bowman here on top can move forward in front of itself 1 space, or back into the left or back into the right 1 space. But wherever it is, it can also attack and hit these 3 things in the stars to do the damage. And so that is the damage, and it doesn't necessarily move, it just does the damage to those spaces, taking out your opponent. And it is similar in chess in the sense that you need to essentially mate your opponent's king in that sense. Now, again, seer at the bottom, again, move, 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 or circles being jump, 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 so you can go over other pieces. And the dynamic is, well, Chris, you've got 2 sides. Well, how do you get to the other side? Well, when you use this side, then it flips over to the other side. So you not only have to anticipate what action you're doing on this side, but how that's going to end you up on the other side. It runs through, again, and this is probably the biggest learning point, is just what all these symbols do. But there's not that many, and they work. So you can see here a little bit of a sample setup, and obviously it's called the Duke, right? So you're not going to be trying to trap someone's king, you're going to be trying to trap their Duke. You're trying to checkmate them, essentially. It's the same manner or mechanism. But it appeals to me a lot more than chess. It is thinky, but not over-thinky. Because all you're doing essentially on a turn is you have to be able to either play one of your pieces, or you can put out a piece. However, you can only put out a piece randomly drawn from a bag, of which you have about 20 different pieces, not including some of the expansions, and it has to be adjacent to said Duke in the first place. Fantastically underrated abstract game. It's not leaving my collection. That is why it is number 6 on the list for this month. Number 5, I finally got this played with my 8-year-old. I never really had any knowledge of how the game played. It's a collectible, it's dice and cards, it's kind of that, right? I bought the 2-player Star Wars Destiny kit. I bought this one on Amazon when it was like $8. At one time it went down for sale. And so I finally got it out. I finally gave it to him for like Easter, right? And we finally got it played. Well, 2 weeks later, there's a Board Game Geek auction, and I just bought about 15 pounds worth of Destiny stuff. So that tells you why it's on the list, right? And if you're not familiar with how it differs, well, you choose one of these starting sites, it goes in the middle. If you control this site, you can use its ability. If you don't control it, you can try and take it over on your turn. But essentially all you're doing otherwise is looking at the cards in your hand and playing them to one of your characters. But you have to roll your dice each round, and your actions are only limited to 1 per turn. So you're going back and forth on a quick action, back and forth that creates the dynamic, because sometimes it will be manipulating the dice, sometimes it will be using the cards to manipulate the dice, or other times it will be using the cards to your advantage to even affect the other person's dice, or just to do more damage. And it's the last one standing wins. The biggest barrier and issue is, like I said, it's collectible, right? So you have to deck build. And that's my biggest weakness. And so that's where my son was super excited. Now, again, super excited one day and super excited, continually are 2 separate and not equal things by any means. And so that's going to be the biggest challenge and the biggest barrier. And again, but he's already made it clear that he was very, very interested when he saw the amount of stuff that came. And I got a pretty decent deal, I think. Bidding at the very last minute got, basically double the price, but it was still overall worth it, I believe, right now. So I'm going to be interested to see where this goes. And again, if I can get this played more than Arkham Horror and Marvel Champions, the low bar on each of those, because I've only played Champions solo and I've yet to play Arkham Horror, this one is already a win in my book, because I've spent less money on this than either of those individually by far. So there you go. That's why it's number 5. So number 4, we're going to go with a little bit of a different twist, but we're also going to go with something that you've seen before. I actually got Root played. Now, this is where the disclaimer comes in. I didn't get Root played in person, but I have played several digital games, and I have gotten my butt kicked every single freaking time. This is going to be a game that I understand in the heart of things, but I have clearly not had it click in terms of the actual gameplay yet. And so it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes. But my whole purpose of getting it and buying it digitally, when I have, Root, I have the River Fulk expansion, I've got all of Marauders coming, I've got the Hirelings coming along with Marauders. So, I'm going to have a bunch of it. But I looked at myself and I said, there's no way I'm going to have a group play for this until I know how to play this and until I know how to teach it. And so that was the learning curve that I set out for myself, and that's why I did it from a digital perspective, because it also plays much, much quicker digitally, obviously. To be able to learn it there was really good. Now, again, with the various factions, I've only played as, your core basic cats, eerie, woodlands, and vagabonds. Now, personally, I prefer my vagabond over anything else, but vagabonds are hard. Getting items from other people, the cats are supposed to be the easiest. I just suck at this game. That's the truth of it. And I've heard people say that it's going to click, after like 8 or 10 games. But again, some of the digital implementation, as good as it is, it also skims over rules very, very quickly. And so if you just don't quite get it, because it'll also make some of it automatic in terms of what it lets you do and what it doesn't let you do, that the rules are definitely things you're going to have to go over 3, 4, 5 times afterwards just to make sure as you're learning it. And again, it's about, can I get it to the table with my group, not just can I get it played digitally. So that is the ultimate win condition for me at this point, not just 30 victory points. So there you go, roots number 4. Now I'm going to hedge here. I'm going to hedge because i.e. Liege forgot something and needs to throw it in here last minute. So 3B is going to be Libertalia Winds of Galecrest. And I just put my review out for this, and I'll argue that this is the best Stonemaier game in all of Stonemaier games. Now, you can also make the argument that this is not originally a Stonemaier game, and that this is a retheme with slight tweaking of the original Libertalia, and I won't argue that point too heavily, but I'll tell you right now, it's going to be on a lot of people's top 10 game lists of the year, and because it plays really well at the 3, 4, and 5 player count, with these little loot tokens that are more of a set collection aspect, as well as, no, they're not starbursts. And then your various 6 cards that you're going to be starting out with simultaneously the same as everyone else. It becomes more of a coup or a flam. Not really coup, but I'm referencing coup because more of you are going to understand that reference than when I say Oriflamme, where with Oriflamme, you have like the same 12 cards, but then you choose 9 of them essentially to start out with, and then you play in any order the 9 of them that you want one by one onto the table going through each round. That's essentially what this is. It's Oriflamme with pirates. Then you do a snake draft in terms of lower initiative to higher initiative. That's the order that they resolve their powers, and then higher initiative to lower initiative in terms of who gets those little starbursts in their sets in the first place. The pirates can either go back to the ship, they can be discarded, or they can affect various aspects of each round because you score each of them a little bit differently. As you can see here at the bottom of this card, there are different symbols corresponding to the different parts of the round in which their powers take place. I'll tell you right now again, top 10 game of the year for me, but I'm going to tell you it's going to be on a lot of other people's lists too. But again, I would not recommend it probably as strongly at the 2-player count. However, I will say that with almost all Stonemaier games, the solo system is very robust. And if you're looking at this, even as a solo game and a 4-player game, 5-player game, I think it's worth it. But that 4-5 player, especially the 5-player game, is second only to one other game that's actually on this list that plays slightly better at all of said play counts. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now, 3A is going to be, and if you don't know what this is Fan-tastic Factories. Fan-freaking-tastic Factories. This is, if you're looking and you are hearing me or you've heard me spout Space Base in the past, this is Space Base only if Space Base actually gave you more of an engine to build. Because that's the problem with Space Base, right? Is you roll the dice and you get resources based off of what you've rolled, but it's not really an engine. You're not really building it, making it more efficient, getting more out of it each time. And now imagine that you each have your own dice instead of the Space Base communal dice, and now that you have the ability to allocate them however you want each turn, then you get more of a Fan-tastic Factories where you're drafting cards and then using cards to play other cards, because you're going to have 2 main resources that you're gaining, not including the cards yourself that you're drafting or either obtaining up the pile, and you're allocating them either in your main tower building or you're allocating them over here on parts of your engine, i.e. the blueprints of other parts of your factory that you've already built. Now, it's interesting because the game goes until someone either builds 10 of these cards, or if we blow this up here, you can see that some of these right here produce goods. And if you have 12 goods, that also triggers the end game. But the combination of the end score is the number of goods you have plus the number of victory points up here in the corner. So all in all, it's a fantastic game. If you're looking for the next step up, I highly recommend it. I bought someone's Kickstarter pledge for lower than the cost of the Kickstarter, and so I have it with 2 expansions plus a little bit extra. So highly recommend it at number 3. Now, what's number 2 and number 1 then this month? Again, this may surprise you, it may not. Number 2, Knizia Classic. In the triumvirate of the 3 Knizia games that get comparison in terms of the tile manipulation mechanisms and more of an almost area control-esque feel, this is Babylonia, and this is by far and away the lightest of all 3 of them, the other 2 being Tigris and Euphrates and Yellow and Yangtze. No, I'm not forgetting about Samurai, but that's a little bit adjacent. I own Yellow and Yangtze. I have not been able to find a copy reasonably of Tigris and Euphrates, so I can't compare those head to head, but I can tell you that Yellow and Yangtze isn't going anywhere in my collection. But where Babylonia fits in this area control sort of tile laying scheme or spectrum of games, is it is by far and away the lightest of the 3. And you may be a little intimidated by these games as a whole, but if you're looking at one and going, which one would I ever want to start with? This is the one I would highly recommend, because I taught this recently to about 5 different people, 2 of which in a 4-player game were another couple that my wife and I played with that had never played really anything heavier than Cash and Guns. So think about that for a second. I went from Cash and Guns to a Knizia Classic. And believe me, this is going to be regarded in that depth later. It's easily explainable, the mechanisms are straightforward, but the nuance and the strategy and the tactical nature is much heavier than the strategic nature of the long-term planning that sometimes comes in with Yellow and Yangtze. And, obviously, because Tigris and Euphrates is very similar, that one as well. Now, it's very straightforward, though, and it plays very similarly but dissimilarly in a 2 to 4 player count, because this map is adjustable as you see the rivers that go down the middle, and depending on how many players there are, you use segments of the map. The whole thing for 4 people, 2 of the 3 for 3 people, and 2 of the other 3 for 2 people. Lay your tiles down, score points. Relatively intuitive, but again, enough nuance there that the tension is still there as well. And I'm freaking good at this game, so that helps too. You have cities that you're going to be matching symbols to. As we blow up here, you can kind of check it out. And then you have farms that you're going to be choosing when to appropriately strike and gather them for victory points. Right here with this one, that are going to depend on how many cities potentially are off the board, or some will just give you straight up victory points, as you see here. The little temples, ziggurnauts, I believe. Ziggurnauts? I'm guessing. I can't remember what they are. You area majority surround one of them, just like you do with the cities, but instead of scoring the city and getting point for that, you can get a one-time usability points or a game-long change to the rules that are going to be in your advantage of how you can play your tiles, or even the number of tiles that you can hold in your little tableau holder, round by round. All in all, it's a fantastic freaking game. This is an absolutely smashing entry point that caters both to the heavier, but as well as the lighter crowds, and that's why it's number 2. So what's number 1? How could something else beat this? Well, that's Ra. My review as well was out earlier this month, and I stand by this review. I don't talk about things, and I don't hype things and then not follow up on them. And this game is a keeper for a reason. This is an absolute fantastic terror of a game. If you don't have a copy of this game, I'm not going to go out and tell you to buy it on GameFound for a deluxe version, but if you can get this at retail afterwards, I would highly recommend it, especially if you don't have auction games. Even if you have no interest in auction games, I have really only one other auction game in my collection, and that's Isle of Skye. But there are some times where I don't feel like doing Isle of Skye in terms of the bidding and the tile laying, sort of route building-esque. And it's not really route building, but if you've played it, you know what I mean. And this adds a different dynamic to the auction. What you have going on here is you're just pulling tiles from a bag until you either fill it up or the raw tile is pulled. And if the raw tile is pulled, well, then you have to go to the auction phase. Or if raw gets all the way down here at the end, well, then you just lose the ability to spend the rest of your little tile auction tokens to try and win auctions in the first place. And if you don't win auctions, then you don't get the tiles for the set collections that you need for individual round scoring, but you also don't get them for the end game scoring over here as well. And so it has that dynamic of balancing the ones I need for every round, because again, if you don't get certain ones in certain rounds, you're going to get even penalized, but you also have to get the ones that are going to give you the big bonuses at the end of the game in addition. So how do you balance that? When do you bid? When do you not try and outbid your opponents? And again, it's just simple, straightforward fun. And the pieces that you're bidding with, when you win a bid, you put your piece in the middle, so the person who wins the next bid gets the high bid one that you potentially just used to get it in the first place. And I will say right now, this plays just as well. The tension and the swinging back and forth of the dynamics of when you bid and when you don't bid works amazingly well at 2, but I would argue it works just as well at 5. It makes it a rarity in game collections as a whole, as well as just a, you know, I don't have a good game for this player count that's not a social deduction or a party game. So all in all, cannot recommend this highly enough. There you go. So that's it, take 2, because in the middle, if you noticed, slightly different, but that's because somehow my camera cut out on the first one. Instead of me just blabbing to pictures of the games, I thought it'd be a little bit more interesting, as always, with me in the corner, so you can see me blabbing about get said games in the first place. Otherwise, that's all I got. Subscribe if you like it. I have a Patreon. That's, you know, the 2 best ways you can help me out. You know, I am just solo doing it right now, and I'm hoping to redo the studio here in the near future. So I'm gonna try and give you as best I can. So hopefully it was interesting. What were your top games of the month? Or what were some games that you got to the table and you were a little bit let down on? You know, I'm going to do a video, I think, upcoming of that. Of games that I said, you know what? I thought this was going to be better. So, always an interesting talk. That's all I got. Stay classy. I'll see you around.